Narcissistic parents like to project, or they have a tendency to project their traumatic childhood experiences onto their own children, if applicable, if they have children. Well, if we're speaking about narcissistic parents, good God. Introduces with narcissistic parents a topic, and then says, projecting onto their children, if applicable. Speaking about parents, but insinuating that if they have children. But then again, this may not apply to human children. What if the narcissistic parent has pets? No children, but pets, and now that's their children. The same scenario, I should believe, because there's abuse entailed from narcissistic parenting, and that can be applied to their pets as well. Plenty of people do consider, they may not consider their pets animals human, they may not personify them, but an animal life is just as valuable as a human life. It's a life. We can make all these arguments about human life being much more valuable, and in a sense, it could be, but the fact that we are sentient creatures, we're able to experience, sense, perceive, make discerning judgments, which an animal can't relate to. At least not by what we can observe, by evidence that we have. We can't speak the same language as them, and they can't speak the same language as us. But they are speaking a language. The cow mooing, the dog barking, cat meowing, etc. Horse neighing, that's their own language. It's one that we can't understand. And in many ways, like we've done time and again, we've corrupted. So, like when we're trying to understand, it's not sincere. It's disingenuous. In a way, we're just mocking the animal. But that can be applied to animals, I believe, the parenting. But in this case, I am referring to humans, so foible. Narcissistic parents are the way they are. They are considered as such because everything is about them. They're egocentric, and this translates to how they parent their children. Now, I suppose it's better than the negligent parent because in many cases it can be observed that narcissistic parents kind of fall in line under authoritarian parenting. They want to exert absolute control. I mean, they wouldn't really be effective. Their narcissism wouldn't really be effective in the role of parenthood if they were negligent. In this way, they wouldn't be able to enact their abuse, which is like the difference between asking someone, requesting someone, or scolding someone about having shoes on in the house. There's a difference between scolding them and enacting punishment against them if they do it again. They'll give them a warning if they have their shoes on, but if they continue to do it, they repeat the action and they'll enforce a punishment, a penalty like that. They'll take away their phone, ground them, revoke them from doing certain activities for just this one trivial mistake. The point here is that the former, when you're just scolding someone, you're reprimanding them, and they may be a little forceful about it, but all in all, the outcome that they want, the desired outcome, is negative reinforcement, reinforcing this action as negative, like not having your shoes on in the house. So basically, you're signaling to the person there's no ill intent. You're just insinuating, you're implying that you don't want shoes on in your home. So ultimately, this holds the person responsible who committed the error to think about it, ruminate, and think, oh, well, they likely don't want me to wear shoes in the home. So I want the next time I come, I'll remember. As we progress, I may forget the next time, but it'll be a slight error and I'll apologize. The important thing is that the person who requested it, whether directly or indirectly, does not enact any form of punishment. And now in this case, I said I was implying in that example that these two are strangers, but with parenting, good parenting is mainly in line with authoritative. This means that you're active in your child's life and you exert authority, but not in an imperious way. You're not over oppressive about it. You're not enacting baseless punishment. Which means that ultimately the child will grow to believe that they need punishment, or they'll be punished every time they commit a wrongdoing, a peccadillo. This may make them afraid to take risks, because they think they'll receive some sort of punitive measure. The good parenting is just telling or hinting at not wanting a certain action to be done, and the child committing that to memory, and progressively it becomes a force of habit. Now, the more they do it, the more exposure they have to it, the less they'll be inclined to repeat the mistake of wearing shoes in the house. So, in a way, that is an example of abuse. The narcissistic parent, who is often in line with authoritarian, is abusing authority. So, of the four parenting styles, we have authoritarian, followed by authoritative, permissive, and then negligent. The two extremes are authoritarian and negligent. There's some controversy about permissive, but it's definitely better. And if you're not authoritative, the next best thing is probably permissive. But there should be a balance, right? There can be parents who are too permissive. The difference between a permissive parent and a negligent parent is that the negligent parent is basically what we call the deadbeat, the one who's not present at all, if ever, in their child's life. They have no contact whatsoever. This could be before the child was born or after, and they only visit it like once. They only visit it like a handful of times, or very infrequently, a few times for the first few years, and then after that, they just abandoned them and was never heard from again. But permissive means that the parent is engaged and active in their child's life. They are present, but the issue is that they don't really exercise much authority, so they're liable to have a difficulty in saying no, which means that the child will believe that they can do anything without consequence. And then there's progressing to authoritative, which is different from authoritarian because there's a healthy balance in how the parent exercises authority. They definitely don't let their child get away with certain things, with doing things that would be considered bad. A permissive parent, maybe, let's say the permissive parent drinks, right? If the child asks for a drink, a glass of wine, for example, at the dinner table, they might give that child a glass of wine. And this is also contingent on culture. You go to the UK, it's completely different from the US. The UK, the drinking age is 18, not 21. You can legally drink at 18. In the US, it's 21, of course. But the difference is that you go to a restaurant in the UK, you can actually lower that. As long as there's a legal guardian with you, as long as there's an adult with you, you can actually drink if you're in a restaurant because you have that supervision. You can have like a glass of wine, but then you'll still have restrictions. Likely you'll have to you're only limited to like the lower alcohol content. So basically your options are limited to beer and wine. Not in many cases, but in most cases. The same with smoking. Smoking age is 16 in the UK, 18 in the majority of states. In some states, it's actually 19. You have to be able to purchase cigarettes or any tobacco products. So it might be a cultural difference as well. It might be a bit difficult to say. You might say that all UK parents are liable to be permissive and give some abductive reasoning to that. Compared to here, no. You cannot, the person who does give you alcohol, if you're not in the comfort of your own home where you can give that authority, in any public space, if you're seeing the person is clearly a minor, it doesn't matter if you're the adult and you're providing supervision, you're setting a bad example and it's illegal, mostly. So you're going to be responsible for any fines imposed, repercussions. So yes, authoritative parenting is definitely considered the optimal method of parenting, whereas authoritarian and negligent are the extreme. But authoritarian is definitely the extreme because, there's really no measure for the negligent when the parent is seldom present. Whereas with authoritarian, literally helicopter parent, always a very oppressive approach, and this fosters a child too strict or draconian. And this ultimately leads the child to grow up becoming very hesitant to do things. The authoritarian parent is liable to be overprotective, which means in some cases the child becomes too sheltered and not exposed to many experiences at an early age. They become a late bloomer. They do things at later ages than the average. So this may have a loose to direct correlation to the amount of youth still living with their parents, because the parent has hindered their opportunities. They have every say in what their child does or say, or they attempt to, despite so many children resort to rebellion. But the rebellious disposition can only do so much to mitigate it. They still are being breathed down the neck, and the only way they try to escape is just getting out as quickly as possible by being employed, saving money, and moving out. But many don't often have that opportunity. The problem persists in leaving the home. The problem doesn't go away. If it's been ingrained to such an extent, it doesn't matter. Leaving early may help to mitigate the damage, but it doesn't really eliminate it completely. So the person can move out, the child can move out, but since they've been exposed so deeply, it's become so entrenched, it's become a habit. They leave, but the impression still lingers. So anytime they have to deal with people in positions of authority, they still feel inclined, they still feel that instinct to be very overly cautious. They may have, because all the pressures to succeed, they are less likely to, they are more prone to perfectionism, perhaps, and they fear rejection. This might result in how they approach relationships, meaning that between avoidant, secure, and anxious, they may definitely be either avoidant or anxious when it concerns platonic or romantic relationships. Avoidant meaning that they don't allow people to get too close. They set boundaries, as opposed to, and if they feel themselves developing an intense attraction, they themselves enact this.
Symbols of great change. This looks Mayan. Is it Kukulkan? I wonder who those two dogs are.
They inhibit themselves from feeling it. They'll keep it secret and just try to ignore it, which means, of course, they're avoiding. As opposed to anxious, where they allow people to get close, but deep inside, they have fears of abandonment.
This box contains the
so they do everything. They might be inclined to be a people pleaser, for example. They might do things above and beyond, just for the sake, it's the incentive to make their partner stay. Because they don't think that they're all that worth. They don't think that they have much worth, and they think their worth. For example, now we've gone from parenting to romantic relationships, sexual. The person who has anxious attachment type issues, if they're sexually attracted to someone,
25th dynasty.
They may feel inclined. The insecurity increases when their partner, on some days, if it seems like there's an extended period where their partner doesn't feel like having sex. So they feel like they've become, somehow they become less desirable for reasons unknown. So, they'll basically just be inclined to please their partner at all costs necessary, whereas the avoidant attached just tries to avoid it altogether. They don't have to worry about rejection because they won't put themselves into a situation where they have to face that, avoiding it altogether. Whereas secure, the middle ground, the balance, the equilibrium, is being secure in the thought that you just know, you're confident that your partner will stay with you, they'll be loyal, and if they just don't, you have an emotionally mature response to things. You know, I don't understand how the approach to sex works. Like, it seems like, do I have to have a schedule? Do I have to have a schedule to have sex? Do we have to have a schedule of some sort? We have to organize the days in which we have sex, or to be spontaneous? Because, you know, your libido shouldn't be scheduled. It's not something to track. It's variable, by all means, because the purpose of sex is procreation, reproduction. You're creating the new life. Not pleasure is always secondary. It's not at the foremost. But back to narcissism and parenting, because I procured this from anecdotal evidence, mainly from my adolescence and the first few years of my veterinarian stage. My being raised by my grandmother, she was very much authoritarian, but now I do see that she's become authoritative, and I do attribute that to her childhood. She had a lot of trauma to deal with during her childhood, a lot of emotional adversity, So that was a lot of her projecting, as well as
Now I can free her.
that extending to her being emotionally immature. She wasn't very developed in that regard. She didn't really have a good hand control over her emotions.
Unlock her love's release.
And that's a flaw. The reason I say that she's transitioned to authoritative now is because she's gained significant self-awareness in her actions and thoughts. She is able to identify when she's being overbearing, or she reflects. She has a much shorter window for waiting time when it comes to self-reflecting on her actions, which is good. I mean, there was physical abuse that I endured.
These are Mum's
I remember being pushed up against a wall and choked, while my grandfather just watched as if it was an entertaining spectacle. Oh, and then there was a time where my grandfather enacted his share, which was when I had my bunk bed. I remember I was on the bottom bunk, and I admit I was being a bit disobedient, but it's always the response. I mean, you never respond physically. I've never done that because I never see the no. Unless you've really made me angry and I've lost my critical thinking, like I'm just angry to the point where I can't think straight. But it never comes to that because I gained that patience, and I suppose I don't want to say this without sounding arrogant. So I mean, I'm always able to immediately analyze. I'm analytical in nature, so it's like no, there's no point in doing that, and there's more consequence to being physical, responding physically with physical aggression than there is. So I just I seethe and anger silently, or I don't really get angry anymore, hardly ever, because it's not productive. It doesn't solve anything. The only time I've ever been physically aggressive was when I was a kid. I was like, what? I was in grade school, probably first or second grade, and I was roughhousing with my sister. Probably wasn't that far back because we're 5 years apart, so she was a kid as well. I was in grade school, and we would play outside, play. It's just, she was very, very annoying, and I'm grateful to my grandmother for adopting me, for raising me, instead of my mother. As much as I love them both, and that would not have been a conducive environment for me. I remember staying with my mother when she was still with my stepdad, when they had their house. I stayed overnight. I could not do it. I was crying. I cried myself to sleep. Before that, I called my grandmother, asked her, please pick me up the next day. Awful. Because I'm completely introverted. Our personalities polar opposites. I'm the black sheep of my family. This isn't me complaining. I don't even really, this is why I hate talking about myself, because it always sounds pretentious or like I'm victimizing myself. But I'm just trying to state facts. Which is why I'm not liable to give anecdotal evidence when it involves me, specifically. Anyway, yeah. I experienced this personally. The effects of that authoritarian parenting can give. Yeah, my grandfather, I was sitting on my bottom bunk, and he grabbed me by my ponytail very roughly and dragged me. It's hilarious to me, actually. I mean, I was operating on hormones. It was mainly the hormones speaking, because I still think it's funny. So maybe I'm a masochist, a sadist, a sadomasochist. There's something very twisted about me. I should.